There's no doubt that some of the cheapest lap time you can get in a race car is by running a proper competition slick tyre. But there's still a lot that goes into choosing and maintaining the slick for your car. To find out a little bit more about this, we're here with Wayne from Michelin New Zealand. So Wayne, for a start, for those who are coming from maybe a semi-slick or even a DOT-approved road tyre on a weekend warrior track day car, and they're considering the switch to a full slick. I mean, I know there's a lot that goes into this, but can you give us an indication on a track like here at Highlands where we might be looking at a 2-minute lap time, what sort of percentage time or time gain could we see from moving to a full slick?
It all depends on car and ability and all that sort of stuff, but I would say from a semi-slick to a slick, the biggest advantage is definitely the compound of the tyre. The construction of the tyre is probably the next biggest thing. You usually find with say what they call summer performance tyres, track day tyres, semi-slicks, they're basically the case of the tyre is just a traditional road car sort of case, so it's not up to the heat temperatures and all that sort of stuff compared to a slick, whereas a slick's made for the weights of the car and the loads through the corner and all that sort of stuff, and then you're talking about the compound on top of the case as well, which gives you the performance. So by having a lot more surface area of rubber on the ground of a slick compared to a semi-slick, that's where the lap time comes. And generally I would say anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5 seconds difference.
Okay, so I mean, when people are considering the amount of money that they're pouring into modifying their cars, and most people I know chase more power, which is kind of hitting it with a sledgehammer. So when you look at that, to make enough power to gain 4 or 5 seconds of lap time, that's a huge amount of increase in power. So the other thing with going to a better tyre is you're actually not putting any more load on the car, fair to say?
Yeah, correct. So basically you can feed as much power as you want into the car, but you still have to get that power to the ground. And it doesn't matter what brand you go to, you still need the tyre to work, and you still need to be able to transfer all that energy from whatever it's putting into it to the ground. So tyre, I think, to me is the key element to lap time and performance.
Okay, so if we're looking at the options available in slick tyres, and obviously there's different compounds, but for a start I just want to talk about tyre width. And is this just simply a case of more is better? Get the biggest slick tyre we can under the car, or is there a little bit more to consider?
Not necessarily. Sometimes you can over grip the car, and you see this many times where people sort of say, oh, I need this 285, 300, blah, blah, blah. But in actual fact, the car's producing so much power, but it probably only needs a 250 sort of tyre. And so, like I said, you can over grip the car, and what it does, it turns it into more of a go-kart, so there's no feel to the car and that sort of thing. So you could go back to a smaller tyre, and the car almost comes to life because all of a sudden you've got feeling in the car and you know what's going on.
So this is more about the driver being actually able to feel through the steering, for example, whether we've got understeer, whether we've got grip compared to a larger tyre?
Yeah, correct. Because traditionally if you over grip the car, you just get to a certain point and you just turn her in and she's going to grip up and go around. But then you're still trying to drive it. Many years ago when Toyota TR86 started, we tried a 250 tyre on the car. The car felt fantastic and that sort of thing, but we went back to a smaller 210 tyre and the car came to life because it had a bit more feel to it. The car moved around a little bit more. It still had the grip that it needed, but the car just transformed itself into a nice little race car.
All right, so in terms of the compound selection, obviously in some of the Michelin slicks we've got the ability to choose a soft, a medium or a hard compound, and if you've followed any motorsport, we hear this talked about in all sorts of formulas of racing. So can you talk to us a little bit about the pros and cons and why we would choose one compound over another?
I think compound choice is to do with weather conditions. Obviously, if it's cooler, so you imagine, so if we're here this morning, the track's 10 degrees, a hard tyre on that's probably not going to work the best. So it's all about just conditions. So if you had the options, say in a GT3 car that we've got here today, some of those cars we have 3 tyre options available. So we have a soft available, which traditionally will give you a very good lap time. But over the course of, say, an endurance race, over an hour sort of thing, the performance of the tyre, the back end of the hour is definitely not as great as it was at the start when it was nice and fresh. And then whereas you got the 8 compound, which is a medium compound, that's probably the most versatile tyre because it still gives you, it is almost as quick as the soft tyre, but at the back end of the hour, it is very good. And then you talk about the hard tyre. it's even better again at the back end of the race. So there's possibilities, if you had to double stint or even triple stint on a harder tyre. But it's all to do with track conditions and weather conditions. And hey, if we had bigger trucks and you could buy more tyres, we would certainly try and bring every single one of them.
So this is where race strategy comes in, particularly with these endurance races, with the ones we're running here this weekend, 1 hour and then a 3 hour. So they really do need to think about that tyre management. Now, I just also want to talk about the life expectancy of a slick race tyre. And here I see a lot of confusion and sort of misinformation out there about how we should treat the tyre when it's brand new. Should you be going out and gently running the tyre and heat cycling it? How long will it last? We talk about slick tyres lasting in terms of heat cycles as opposed to outright wear on the tyre. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, sort of the Michelin have documents that's available on the internet and that sort of stuff, and they have like cases of where they'll give you a maximum and minimum of camber, and then a maximum and minimum of pressure. So if you get those within the window, they'll say that tyre there at whatever pressure camber will do one stint of 180 k's. But you reduce some of the camber, put some more pressure in the tyre to help hold the tyre up, you might be able to do 2 stints. So all of a sudden you're going from a pit window strategy of just coming in, putting fuel in it and going again, and still having the same performance. So just by reducing a little bit of the camber and adding a bit more pressure to hold the tyre. So your strategy goes from 160k maybe to out to 320k. So to have that opportunity in your pocket as a strategy is quite a good thing.
Now that's all good for these race teams that are chucking on a set of green tyres and going out for a race, but a lot of the home enthusiasts, we're not doing endurance racing, so we're buying a set of tyres, which understandably is a big investment as well, and we might be running that car over a full season of racing for some 6 or 8 lap sprint races. So is there an issue there with the life expectancy of the tyre, given that basically we're running the tyre, getting it up to temperature and then cooling down, and it might not run for another week or a month?
Yeah, certainly sort of like the heat cycling of the tyre definitely sort of degrades the tyre quite a bit, and I think there's not much you can do it, because once it's run, it's sort of you're at the mercy of the elements of what's going on. You can protect it a bit by keeping them cool, and some people say wrap them up and that sort of stuff, but unfortunately once the tyre's been roaded, it starts to just naturally sort of break itself down anyway through the oils in the tyre and that sort of stuff. So you can't really slow that down. Unfortunately, you sort of just have to just roll with it and just hope that the tyre comes out the other side. But sort of in general, most tyres will have a window from 200 k's to 400 k's of mileage, and most club guys, like you say, they haven't got the budgets to carry on and just keep bolting tyres on. But it's a matter of just looking after them, and sort of if you can cycle the tyre the best you can, even by moving it around the car and from a loaded tyre to an unloaded tyre, just to get the maximum mileage out of it, you tend to find most tyres will probably last a good year or so. But yeah, like if you're just going to bang around all day, you will eventually just wear it out, and then the tyre's finished.
All right, so I want to just talk a little bit about tyre pressure and camber, because you've mentioned that a couple of times now. And we see a lot of the professional racing classes actually mandate a minimum tyre pressure. And my understanding is this is done primarily for safety. But we also see, particularly for a quali lap, a lot of the teams, they specifically go to the trouble of setting that right at the minimum. So is it reasonable to assume there that the lower we can run that tyre pressure, the more outright grip we're going to get, or is it a little bit more complex than that?
I think it's a bit more complex. Like the biggest thing that damages a tyre is definitely pressure. So if when you're talking about say other categories that run in Australia that have a mandated 17 psi, if they can, you probably find if they were to set that at a 17 psi and you actually cool the tyre down, that could turn out to be sort of 13 or 14 psi, which I think is where they used to start them anyway. But anything below that, I think there's very big dangers of damage in the tyre. So unless you don't manage the tyre properly on your out lap and your first 1 or 2 laps, that there is a possibility there of a tyre failure.
So a bit of management from the driver there, staying away from curbs and being careful as the temperature and the pressure build up. It's fair to say that while they're starting at 17 psi, of course, once they've got a couple of laps under their belt, the tyre pressure will come up a reasonable way.
Yeah, correct. So it's a matter of when you leave pit lane, so you're not turning into your first turn fully committed, expecting the tyre to grip up. So you need to just manage it by just not being aggressive on the steering and definitely keeping off the curbs, because once you jump a curb, by the time it compresses as it goes over the top of the curb to when it lands, it compresses the sidewall of the tyre, and usually you find after a number of laps, it could be quite early, it could be quite late, that if it is compromised the sidewall, you will have a failure in the tyre, and that sort of, it's just about managing the system and all that sort of stuff, and it's just, you just have to be very, very careful, and camber has a lot of pressure on that as well. So if you've got a low pressure with quite a high camber, you're very much sort of putting the tyre in the window to be damaged.
All right, now I just want to talk on that same note about getting the tyres up to temperature and pressure out on the track. So this is the age-old debate. We see the common technique is always weaving, and we've also seen a number of drivers come unstuck with that, either crashing into other drivers or coming off the track, which is never really a good look on the formation lap.
Correct.
Or behind the safety car for that matter. The other technique is to use the brakes to generate heat that goes into the wheel. So can you talk to us about the effectiveness of those two techniques and how they differ?
Well, I think the weaving works very good on a used tyre. So mid-race, you have a safety car and you stop. I think it just helps clean the tyre a bit, because when you are circulating in race formation, there is a lot of debris and used rubber on the track. So it just helps try to get rid of some of that. But I think on a formation lap, I think you find most of the guys, they do weave quite aggressive. But again, you still need to be careful of that because of the low pressure. But I think braking is probably the key element to it, to generate heat from the brakes through the wheel and into the case of the tyre and that sort of stuff. So I think they probably work hand in hand. Personally, I think the braking's probably 60 to 70% of the job, and the weaving's probably the last sort of 30 to 40%.
The advantage, as well as I understand it with the braking, is particularly after the formation lap where the cars will sit on the grid, you've got that heat dissipating off the brakes into the wheel and then into the tyre, so it actually has a benefit while you're sitting there as well.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so sort of because the brakes are massively hot, so it just helps the whole program get through, and once that wheel's hot, it basically it travels through the case of the tyre and into the core of the tyre just to add some temperature to it. So the more temperature you get it into the tyre earlier, the better off you be out on your first 1 or 2 laps.
Another technology that we see often used to get that heat into the tyre initially is to use tyre blankets or tyre ovens, two different ways of kind of getting the same net result. Can you talk to us about the difference between the two, maybe the advantages and disadvantages?
Yeah, well, I think sort of the tyre blankets, personally, I think are probably the best option over a tyre oven. At least with the tyre blankets, you can set them at a certain temperature, and the temperature seems to be between sort of 60 to 80 degrees, but they need to be in the blankets for about half an hour, 45 minutes, and that helps heat the tyre thoroughly through the tyre, not just heating the outside of the tyre. So I have seen some cases where you do see a lot of graining on top of the tyre, and I think what's happened is they've turned the blankets on and they've heated the outside of the tyre, but it hasn't actually travelled through the core of the tyre. So the outside, the top of the tyre is very warm, but the core is not. So outside of that, I think the blankets are definitely a lot more controllable over a tyre oven. Whereas you have this big tyre oven, you wheel a set of tyres in, and everyone knows heat rises, so you end up with a stack of tyres there where the top tyre is very hot and the bottom tyre is quite cool. It's still warm, but nowhere near as hot as that, so it's a lot more controllable. And usually they've got kerosene heaters and they're just pumping in the heat and that the whole time.
So it's actually possible also to overheat those top tyres and actually damage or prematurely wear the tyre?
Yeah, correct. So I think if you overheat the tyre, then I think you definitely lose performance out of the tyre. So I think sort of by having controllable blankets, I think personally that is the way forward. And like I said, I think the oven does a good job, but it's just completely uncontrollable. Unless you have a guy on there that knows what he's doing, is just cycling the tyres all the time. But I tell you, when you're working around race teams, you see these guys working flat out. I tell you, the tyre is the last thing that's almost thought about, but that's the key performance of the car. So it seems a shame to leave the key element of the car wasted when that's what makes the car go fast.
That's been great to get some insight into the tyre. Certainly it's raised my own knowledge on the tyres, and it is such a fundamental part of the race car that I believe, particularly at the club level, is so often overlooked. So thanks heaps for your time there, Wayne.
Yep, no problem. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
If you like that video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you're not already a subscriber, make sure you're subscribed. We release a new video every week. And if you like free stuff, we've got a great deal for you. Click the link in the description to claim your free spot to our next live lesson.